Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, your host. Sandy Whitehawk is the elder in residence at the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. She is a U.S. Navy veteran who served in the Navy during the mid-1970s. Recently, she was in the intensive care unit at the VA hospital in Minneapolis. During her stay in the ICU, Sandy was a patient of Alex Pretti, the man who was killed, an act some have described as an execution, last Saturday by Border Patrol officers. She's here today to talk about the care he provided while she was in the ICU at the VA hospital. And joining her is another colleague of hers from the National Native American Boarding School Coalition, is Dr. Sam Torres, who serves as the Deputy Executive Officer of the organization. And he is in the Twin Cities, so we're going to talk to him about what the Native community is doing in reaction to the aggressive behaviors of the federal agents. So welcome both of you to Native Bidaské. And Sandy, I understand you were just released from the hospital this week, so we're not going to try to overtax you today because we have a lot of respect for you and the work that you've done relating to Indian boarding schools. But what we really do want to talk to you about your relationship, the interactions you had with Alex, who was tragically killed. Can you just talk to us about how often do you see him? He was your attending nurse at times, I understand. So tell us about that experience.
Thank you, Levi. I want to say first and foremost, the IC unit, the team that works the ICU, the nurses, they are remarkable. They're just all standout nurses. And Alex was assigned to me, but he also just, nurses would come in and help when another nurse was busy. But the thing that, several things struck me about him is he was one of those individuals who would just go above and beyond, making sure you're comfortable, making suggestions of things that would help in that way. He was always, always smiling and made it seem like when I needed something, and it felt like I needed a lot, I said, oh my God, I think I became high maintenance. And I remember us laughing about that. And he goes, you're not high maintenance. You just need help right now. And so he was always encouraging and nurturing and liked to visit. He wanted to hear about my service, but we ended up talking about my time in the color guard when I was in the color guard in Oneida Nation color guard. And I got to tell some awesome stories of my experience, and I could tell that he was genuinely interested. And he even said, I like really listening to the old guys talk about their experience. So he was someone who really put you at ease, in his genuine interest in your service and your life. And all of that contributes to healing because you can relax, feel safe. And that's what I experienced with him, especially the always smiling. Just no matter what was going on, he had a smile on his face.
Well, in a Facebook post, you wrote that he truly understood you. What did you mean by that statement, Sandy? He truly understood you.
Well, no one likes to be that vulnerable. And he had a way of conveying that it doesn't matter that you just turned your light on 20 minutes ago. He understood that hesitancy and that, I don't know how to say it in words, but he just knew how to put you at ease always. So I felt like he understood the vulnerability that someone feels when they're that sick and having to depend on those around you to help you. I didn't have to explain to him my background of why it's hard for me to ask for help and all of that, which was really, that's just healing. And that's the energy he carried all the time that we interacted.
Well, tell me, if there was one word you could describe Alex Pretti, what would that be?
Nurturing.
Thank
Very
you
nurturing.
Yeah, thank you for that. And tell me, how did you find out that he was killed by the Border
Oh,
Patrol?
so I didn't know because I wasn't watching TV a lot, and I was on Facebook, but I don't know, I just didn't know. I got a text from a friend of mine, and she said, Sandy, would you happen to know this nurse at your time at the VA? She wasn't even thinking, I guess she thought maybe I would have known him from before, not necessarily the ICU. But I said, geez, he looks like this Alex, and I said, let me see if I can confirm that. Because I didn't want to, I was like, could it be Alex? It's just unbelievable, right? So I asked one of the nurses, I said, it was the man that was shot our Alex Pretti? She goes, yeah, it was. Oh, I mean, he had just taken care of me a week before that, just a week before that. And the nurses that knew him or had worked with him were so sad. Everyone was so shocked and could barely talk without tears coming to their eyes. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, really? What? And then when I saw the video finally and I saw what happened, I went, yep, he's nurturing and takes care of people. Of course, he would have tried to help that lady that got pushed down. Of course, he would have put himself in between that to protect her because ultimately that's what he is when he's in that as a protector, And I was like, oh, so it was just really hard to settle into that it was him of all people. Not that anyone deserves that, but I mean, this nurse, this man, this nurturing, extremely knowledgeable. I think it was medical research that he was into.
Hmm.
So not just, I mean, he's always expanding his knowledge. And it's just, we didn't have any words. We just, we're all teary when we find out. And then
Yeah.
when they were trying to villainize him, that made it even harder to hear that because it's so opposite of what he really was, what we saw and experienced with him.
Well, Chi McWish, thank you, Sandy, for your input, your firsthand knowledge. Alex being a nurse to you and providing you that nurturing care. Of course, millions of people have seen that videos, and it's a very tragic time in America. And so I'm going to turn over to you, Sam. You're up in the Twin Cities, and tell us about what the Native Americans are going through right now. Are they afraid? You know, my understanding there's a kind of a sense of community. A lot of some people have likened it to the how people coalesce around the time of Standing Rock. So tell us what's going on in Minneapolis with the tribal communities there.
Thank you, Levi, for having us on today. And I want to say thank you to Sandy Whitehawk for offering those reflections and insights. And while, yes, it is true that Sandy and I are colleagues, we're, I think, deeper than that. Sandy is a good relative to so many of us. And she's an amazing unchi to my children and many other grandchildren. So we're family and kin in that way. Regarding the impact of this type of environment in the Twin Cities right now has been deeply widespread. The NABS headquarters, our office right there on Franklin Avenue down the street from Powwow Grounds and the Minneapolis American Indian Center, Native American Community Clinic, and many other businesses and service-oriented, Native-led, Native-owned businesses and operations are kind of there in a concentrated area. And so we've certainly been feeling this impact, this deep impact. I think the Standing Rock timeline is a worthy analogy of how folks are coming together to join in solidarity and support relatives and support the community. We exist on this continuum and evolution of community and kinship in the Twin Cities that has been building for many, many generations. We can go even deeper than Standing Rock and find the roots of the American Indian movement in the Twin Cities. And we're building off of that as well. And so as Native people, Native organizations, Native leaders are standing alongside our relatives that are seeking to build community and kinship in ways that our people deserve. It's beautiful to see on one end of this spectrum people coming together, responding to food drives, building community pantries, running groceries for relatives who feel unsafe, that are perhaps more vulnerable, perhaps undocumented, and whose kids need to go to school. I think a worthy evolution of our community to be able to build off of the leadership and to build off of the context of struggles past, to be able to help keep our communities as safe as we possibly can be. People are talking to their neighbors. It's not just tribes keeping to each other. It's not just neighborhoods keeping to each other. We are seeing folks come together and building bridges and expanding the notion of kinship and community in ways that the cities is a really beautiful sight to behold. Though, of course, the other side of that is the reason why much of this is coming around is because our folks feel unsafe. And so there's a lot of grieving, there's a lot of wounding that is being seen in the Twin Cities. Our relatives, whether documented or undocumented, are often being targeted and sometimes even apprehended. And so we've been in close contact with many of our partners, such as the Native American Rights Fund and the NDN Collective, and really making sure that folks are connecting with materials that can help keep them safe to know their rights so that they know what the Constitution protects them against and how to assert and invoke those rights to help keep people safe.
Yeah, tell me this. Do you know much about the arrest of the natives or Native Americans who were either detained or arrested? Can you fill us in on that?
So there's not much additional that I can share about that. We know that the tribal councils from each of their nations have been getting involved, and some have been getting some affirmative information about the whereabouts of their citizens. Some of those citizens have been released back to their nation, but it is certainly something that is exposing the current display of government to government relationships where tribal sovereign citizens are being apprehended. So I think it's something that's worthy of looking at.
Where can people donate? Where should people donate for those who maybe we're at Standing Rock and have that caregiving hearts and say, hey, we got to help our relatives in the Twin Cities? Where can they donate, or how should they best do that?
It's a great question. Fortunately, there's a variety of different local and regional organizations and collectives that are taking on some of these really incredible measures to, like I mentioned, reimagining what community looks like and how to protect people. One of the ones I think is really worthy of highlighting is some of the on the ground work that Powwow Grounds, which is a local Native owned coffee and food place that's working alongside the Native American Community Development Institute, or NACD, as well as the Indigenous Protectors movement. These are places in the Twin Cities that are Native run, Native owned and operated, and that are helping to connect people with resources that are really helpful. Here on the other side of the river in St. Paul, the Indigenous Roots Cultural Arts Center is a beautiful place where much of the same kinds of things are going. We have a food pantry over here where a food drive is still running. We're running groceries for folks and making sure that people have what they need during some of these really uncertain and tumultuous times, both at Indigenous Roots and at Powwow Grounds and in areas all over the community. There are areas that are coming together and saying what we also need to do right now, in addition to being prepared with resources and knowing your rights and connecting with our communities and being better relatives to each other, is the notion and the need for ceremony and an outlet for grieving. We have to recognize that there is deep grief in the Twin Cities right now. And as a result, we need to be able to process that. And so relying on prayer, relying on our traditional ways of knowing, really leaning into those moments of collective ceremony and collective grieving have been really important. I know being at Indigenous Roots in St. Paul as a board member myself, I have been really proud to see the way in which the community has come together to hold vigils for our relatives that have passed away by this violence, actively going out to those memorial sites and holding ceremony where our relatives offer dance and song, flowers, and different kinds of medicines and offerings, both for Alex and Renee. And so, as we continue to see this unfold, it'll be really important for us to continue to lean on our medicine, to lean on that spiritual backbone, because there is much more work for us to do together. We will need to be able to have that ceremony and that prayer and that spiritual commitment to be able to allow us to be sustained in this moment.
Yeah, I really appreciate what the community's doing, and I think it speaks to the resiliency of Native people. And with all the work you have done with Indian boarding schools, you certainly know the resiliency of Native people. We are survivors, but the reality is we have to be very careful and prayerful these days with the vulnerability. As darker people, we are all vulnerable, and let's just be honest, the two people who were killed were white, the Caucasians. So sometimes we think because of who we are, we want to protect obviously other Native Americans, but everybody's at risk these days in today's society. So thank you both for the work you have done through the years. You know, my heart is with our relatives up in the Twin Cities, and we will hope to do some reporting from there soon. So thank you very much. Sandy, you want one last word to say, and then we'll hear one last word from Sam, and then we'll bring it to a close.
I really appreciate you inviting us to come and speak, and so we can get that out of what we know. People get so much misinformation, or I wanted to say that. And then I want to also commend Native Roots for coming out and offering danza and offering those prayer times. And that encourages others to come out. And I'm really proud of Sam's leadership in this. And also just want to say that, you know, at first I was a little upset that it took a white person to be hurt before they wanted to move. But really, we have to look at it in the same way we look at ourselves. When we see someone that looks like us, we feel that kinship. We start asking, where are you from, and everything else. Mm-hmm. And when our white community, they feel pretty safe because they haven't had the same onslaught as we have. But now they saw Renee and they saw Alex, and they're like, hey, this really can happen to anyone. Mm-hmm. And it wakes that spirit up in them. It's was always there, but they didn't have the the opportunity to see that it was there in them, that they are indeed, as Sam keeps saying, community. You know, we went there to support them because they're community, their relatives. Doesn't matter that they were white, that we're all members of that. We're all members of that human race. And so sadly, that was the last gift Renee and Alex left us, was that reminder of who we are as a people.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chima. Sam, what you give the last word?
Thank you, Levi. And I completely agree with everything that Sandy has mentioned. I think the last thing that I would just like to offer is, though we are in a very wounded place right now, our city hasn't seen this type of an environment in many years on our streets. There may be a lot of feelings of fear, of panic, of uncertainty, and also perhaps a sense of righteous anger and grieving. And I think all of those feelings are valid and important to hold. But one thing that I do want us to be able to hold on to is that notion of hope and kinship, because without that sense of hope, it's impossible for us to imagine a reality after this type of tumultuous violence and uncertainty and chaos. And as Native people, we've been around since time immemorial, and we've experienced waves of chaos and uncertainty in a variety of shapes and forms, and we survived, and we will survive this as well. But this is an opportunity for us to be able to continue to engage in creative, collaborative, decolonial imaginary that will perhaps invite us into a new way of being able to be in community with one another, a more bold way, a way that keeps us even safer, a way that protects our children even stronger. So I think that this is a really powerful moment for us not to sit back and say it's not happening to me, because it is. And if it's not happening to you individually right now, there is a possibility that it could be, not to instill panic or fear, but to make sure that we are doing what we can from our place of leadership, from our place of service, from our place of responsibility, to be able to connect more deeply with our relatives, with our community members, so that we can work towards building that future that our children, that our grandchildren, that those relatives that haven't been born yet can enjoy. We have to be thinking multi-generational. We always have. So leaning on our traditional ways is important now more than ever.
Thank you both. And to our viewers, Chi Miigwech, for tuning in to another episode of Native Bidaské. I ask that you would say a prayer for the United States of America. Say a prayer for Indian country, our relatives. And as I like to tell you every week, the elders, hug those young ones, and young ones take care of those elders. They're so valuable to us and so precious. And so thank you, Chi Miigwech. We will see you next week for another episode of Native Bidaské.
Thank you for joining us. If you value our warrior journalism for Indian country, please consider supporting our work by scanning the QR code or visiting the link below. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and sign up for our free daily newsletter. Chi Miigwech.